Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Heysen. Peter is a grandson of the artist Sir Hans Heysen. Is in fact the eldest son of one of 4 grandchildren. He was instrumental in the initiative to open the Cedars, the home of Sir Hans and Lady Heysen for over 50 years, opened to the public in 1994. And he's currently working with his siblings to preserve the property. And he has had, I think, the burden and pleasure of having the responsibility of famous grandparents and the house and collection they left to us. So I will hand over to Peter.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for coming on such a hot day, a bit of a Heysen day. When the Flinders Ranges used to rain up there and get cool, he'd come home. He believed that Australia was equivalent to heat, hence he didn't live in Tasmania or Victoria. We've got to, just a little aside, talking about £1,500 for the purchase of this place. An example of how good advice of our treasurer is that superannuation funds should put their money in the bank and not in shares is when my grandmother turned 21, she inherited £1,500 from her father, and that was 1903 or thereabouts. When she died in 1962, she still had £1,500 in the bank. In 1903, it would have bought 3 workers' cottages. In 1962, it would have bought 1 room in 1 cottage. Hence, you can take that advice for what it's worth. Why do we want to preserve this place? It represents a man who came, was an immigrant, couldn't speak English, was spat on the street and called a German nigger, even though he wasn't black. He told me that they used to change addresses at 2 in the morning because that's where when the landlord was asleep. So there was a man who started off with nothing, and by hard work and skill, he eventually became a knight of the realm and a respected person, which points to his abilities, but does also point to the fact this is a great country that allows people to cross all sorts of social barriers and financial barriers. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is, and I read this walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, that our past or our history is a prologue to the future. And if we don't learn from the past, we'll know nothing for the future. So grandfather died in 1968, and he left this property. He left the house and 40 acres to my father. He left a third of the remaining estate to his children minus my father. He left a third to all his children, including my father, and he left a third to his grandchildren. The last 2 years of his work he instructed to be burnt, which was burnt by my father and Nora outside the studio, and he left 2,000 drawings or thereabouts the gallery. Why did he do that? He thought they could be a teaching tool in the future. He was very much into education. He was a very modest man, and he didn't want things to be preserved for his engrandment, but really as an educational tool. So my father inherited it. He used up his third to buy the rest of the land. He restored and bought pictures to increase the collection, published prints, framed, and then his time came and he died and left it to 4 of us. And we initially spent most of the cash just keeping it going, and Alan came along and we decided to open it. And we've been just making ends meet. No spare money for any new initiatives or restoration. The property is certainly not self-sustaining in the future, not with the potential it's got. I've set up the Hans Heysen Foundation, which is an incorporated body with gift recipient tax deductibility status and as an artistic charity. And we have 4 directors or trustees, and we have still to make up the advisory committee. It's a complicated structure, but a complicated structure to make sure nobody cheats and that the outcomes are met, and the outcomes is for the preservation of this place and the promotion of what it represents. The future. How do I see the future? I guess part of it's driven by Nora. Now, though Alan says I initiated the setting up of the foundation, that's true, but without Alan's help and encouragement and going to see Nora didn't like me awfully much at that stage, and Nora came round to supporting it and giving a huge amount or number of pictures to it. And but she did have one problem, and that is she didn't like a studio. She said, that's a museum, that's an art gallery, it's not my studio. So I hope to see the house go back to as it was, less pictures, less lights, as it was. My view was that if grandfather suddenly appeared in the dining room, he would look around and say, why have you moved that picture? Not where am I? I travel a lot. I actually heard somebody's travelled more than me today, but for instance, I was visiting some historic houses in Amsterdam last week, and that was sad because they are very thin on what they have to offer. We've got to move into the new world. We've got a web page which is old. We must have online shopping, booking. We've got to have more events, and I think the pictures and the grandfather's better pictures should be shown in a specific gallery rather than trying to make the house serve two purposes. So I'm a bit influenced by the National Trust concept in England, of which I've visited many of their places, which have, if you see National Trust sign, it usually means there's free parking, a good cafe, a good shop, some lawns, place you can have a picnic, and a few things you can see without having to pay anything. And I think that is the crux of these things, that a house is a house. I've been there once, why will I go back? If you've been to see a film, you've seen it once, you don't often see it again, and we've got to offer more, but we must preserve what we have, which is the anchor or the rock of the place. The gardens, as Alan said, is we have trying to preserve the area behind the fence down to the first tennis court. It was really the garden as grandfather had it. We've added on a garden up here, garden down below, and then we've planted a paddock with native trees to try and set up a corridor for native birds and animals. When you walk out the gate, you'll see a sign that's a stand that's deteriorating. We've got what's called the Artist's Walk. I'm hoping that we will get a flora and fauna walk. You go down Rundle Mall, for those of you that know what Rundle Mall is, or Burke Street in Melbourne, or George Street in Sydney, and ask somebody what a stringy bark is, nobody would really know. I would like people to come up here, be able to touch and feel and smell a stringy bark and other things, so have a native walk. We've got a creek down the back, lovely walks, lovely hills, and that will be a great educational tool. A sculpture walk, and we did have the International Biennial Sculptural Symposium up on the ridge. We had 12,000 people in 3 weeks. It was a concept I'd never got my mind around until it happened, and that is that trucks delivered stones up to 12 tonnes, dumped them on the ground. Artists came in from Australia and round and internationally, and people came and watched them. Within 3 weeks they created sculptures. It was most inspiring. People, as we've been told, people like to be involved, discover, get the dust, see what's going on. It was magnificent. In my recent travels, and particularly, I've noticed that in the big galleries around the world that there's so much more involvement of children there drawing on the ground, listening, but actually doing things. And I noticed that some of the galleries have their own children's areas. Those sort of things could be developed here. The orchard. We've got a lot of things to learn. Here we are in a dry country. 140 years ago there was no irrigation, so where would you plant an orchard? Just past the studio is the orchard. They planted in a soak, for those that are familiar with the soak. So there's water coming through the soil all through the summer. Some of those trees were planted in the 1900s, and they're still there because they've got natural water supply. We can learn by that. I'm hoping that we can develop groups to come and show how we can preserve some of those old fruit, because this place should be an education tool in many things. I could go on for ages, but just something that's cropped up, because I didn't welcome you to the country of the Kaurna people, because I don't think it's actually the Kaurna people here. I was at Hermannsburg Mission. You used to be able to get into it, but I got into it, and I was most surprised to see Hans Heysen's name there. Why was it there? Because he and a group of artists raised money to put a bore down some away from the Hermannsburg Mission to supply water for their gardens. Also in the house were Aboriginal works of art that he had bought, which unfortunately aren't here now. So he's had some appreciation for the Aborigines back in the 20s, long before most people did. So not only was he an environmentalist, he was very aware of those less fortunate in our community, particularly the Indigenous people. That's a little bit of what we're trying to do. How do we do it? That's a good question. We've got to raise some money. We're working on that. I think I've identified about 40% of what we need to raise, but when we do get going, you'll all hear about it. I'm going to be in the studio. Now, there are other things you can do. There's the house. I think you just choose which you want to go to first. There's a little track if you want to go out to the next artist walk, and you walk along the path around the corner. You see signs to the shady pool. You can go down there. You lift up a lid. You can see a picture that he painted of that 50, 60 years ago. If you want to walk past the studio this side up to the top of the hill, you can see the last remaining sculpture up there. When you do go out to the shady pool, you see remnants of the last fringe festival sculpture works. Like there's a big Alan will have to tell me what it is. But if you look to the right, it's what you... Lyrebird bough, but it's what you see in it that matters. There is still an old man on the stump, is there, on the way out, and a few other things. That created great interest, because a museum can't be dead, got to be alive, and all those things around it make it alive. Oh, yes, there's a car and caravan there. And that helps bring men. We're doing up the whole hay shed. We've got going to put copies of drawings there that he did around the farming world up here, so that men can go and pick up an old shovel and have a look at things, look at the chook yard, because the only thing a lot of men find interesting is the Model A Ford and the caravan. But you've got to have something for everyone. Toilets up behind here. They're actually in the tractor shed. You might say, oh, but that looks new. Well, a tree fell on the last one, so we had to rebuild it. And my philosophy was that we didn't build any new solid structures within the garden area. So we put the toilets in the tractor shed. That caused a problem with the local council, which took a little while to resolve. But anyhow, they work. So you either go up there or up round the other way. Thank you for coming. I've got a lot from the conference up to date, a lot. But thank you, and enjoy the next hour.
Thank you very much, Peter. So now you know what to do. The men off to the chook shed, and the women the house and the studio.